Have you ever felt that ancient chill when walking through the English countryside at dusk? That sensation of invisible eyes watching from forgotten burial mounds? The whisper of something primordial stirring beneath moss-covered stones? Tonight, we descend into the shadows of England's darkest past, where legends aren't mere stories, but echoes of genuine terror that once stalked our ancestors through mist-shrouded valleys and haunted moorlands. Before we begin our journey into the abyss, I need you to do something crucial. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what we're about to explore goes far deeper than simple folklore. These are the buried nightmares of ancient Britain, the creatures and curses that Christianity tried to erase, but never quite succeeded in destroying. Drop a comment telling me which English county you're from, because I guarantee your homeland harbors secrets that would make your blood run cold. Are you watching from Yorkshire's haunted dales, Cornwall's witch-cursed cliffs, or perhaps the ancient forests of Sherwood, where things far worse than outlaws once dwelled? Your presence here creates a circle of modern witnesses to horrors that span millennia, connecting us to the primal fears that shaped our ancestors' understanding of the world. Tonight, we're not just exploring folklore. We're conducting an archaeological dig into the collective unconscious of the English people, unearthing terrors so fundamental they've survived Roman conquest, Saxon invasion, and Norman domination. I am your guide through realms where rational thought holds no dominion, where the boundary between history and nightmare dissolves like morning mist. These aren't sanitized fairy tales from children's books, but the raw, unfiltered nightmares that kept entire villages awake, huddled around dying fires, praying for dawn's protective light. But here's what makes tonight's journey truly disturbing. Every legend we'll explore tonight is rooted in documented historical events, archaeological discoveries, and witness accounts that stretch back over 1,000 years. These aren't modern inventions or Hollywood fantasies. They're the genuine terrors that haunted England when the land was younger, wilder, and infinitely more dangerous than the sanitized countryside we know today. Picture medieval England as it truly was. Not the romantic vision of knights and castles, but a landscape where vast forests stretched unbroken for hundreds of miles, where ancient stone circles still pulsed with pre-Christian power, where Roman roads cut through territories that had never been fully conquered by civilization. In this primordial England, supernatural forces weren't matters of belief, but stark realities that influenced every aspect of daily life. Now imagine discovering that some of these ancient horrors never truly disappeared, that they adapted, evolved, found new ways to manifest in each generation, that the very soil beneath your feet might harbor something that has been waiting centuries for the right conditions to emerge once more. The forgotten terrors we're about to encounter tonight fall into three distinct categories, each representing a different aspect of England's supernatural heritage. First, we have the Hollow Men, ancient guardians of burial sites who emerge when sacred ground is disturbed. These aren't shambling zombies from modern fiction, but something far more intelligent and infinitely more dangerous. Archaeological records from the 12th century onwards document encounters with these entities, describing beings that appear human from a distance, but reveal themselves as empty shells animated by forces that predate human civilization. Second are the moor stalkers, creatures that haunt England's vast moorlands and have been responsible for countless disappearances throughout recorded history. Unlike the romantic notion of getting lost on the moors, these disappearances follow specific patterns that suggest intelligent predation by something that understands human psychology better than we understand ourselves. Finally, we'll explore the Threshold Guardians, entities that manifest at liminal spaces, crossroads, ancient bridges, the boundaries between parishes. These beings enforce laws older than any human legal system, and their justice operates according to principles that modern minds struggle to comprehend. But before we encounter these specific terrors, we need to understand the landscape that birthed them. England's supernatural geography isn't random. Every haunted location, every cursed site, Every place where the veil between worlds grows thin follows patterns established thousands of years ago by peoples whose names have been forgotten, but whose spiritual practices left indelible marks on the land itself. The ancient Britons understood something that we've forgotten in our rush toward modernity. They recognized that certain locations possess inherent power, that the earth itself has sacred sites where supernatural forces gather and manifest. Stone circles, burial mounds, natural springs, hill forts. These weren't just practical locations, but carefully chosen points where the barrier between the physical and metaphysical worlds becomes permeable. When the Romans arrived, they didn't destroy these sites but co-opted them, building their temples over British sacred groves. The Saxons followed the same pattern, and later the Normans built their churches on foundations that had been holy for millennia. Each conquering culture added their own layer of spiritual practice, but they never fully erased what came before. Instead, they created a supernatural palimpsest where ancient powers persist beneath Christian symbolism, waiting for moments of weakness or transition to reassert themselves. This is why England's supernatural landscape feels so layered, so complex. We're not dealing with simple ghosts or spirits, but with accumulated centuries of spiritual practice, religious conflict, and unresolved supernatural tensions that have built up like geological strata. Every ancient site in England carries this weight of accumulated supernatural history, and some locations have become so saturated with otherworldly energy that they've become permanent doorways between our world and realms we were never meant to glimpse. Archaeological evidence supports these claims in ways that make modern scholars deeply uncomfortable. Excavations at prehistoric sites consistently uncover evidence of practices that suggest our ancestors possessed knowledge about manipulating supernatural forces that we've completely lost. Ritual deposits, carefully arranged human remains, astronomical alignments that serve no practical purpose unless they were designed to interact with non-physical phenomena. The Roman historian Tacitus wrote extensively about the supernatural practices he witnessed in Britain, describing rituals so disturbing that his accounts were censored for centuries. Medieval chroniclers documented encounters with supernatural entities that follow patterns identical to modern sightings, suggesting these phenomena aren't psychological projections, but genuine interactions with something that exists independently of human belief. Even more disturbing are the government documents. Official records from various periods acknowledge supernatural phenomena in language carefully designed to avoid admitting what they're really describing. Military reports that reference unusual atmospheric conditions in locations known for supernatural activity. Church records that document spiritual disturbances requiring specialized intervention. Local government files that catalog disappearances and deaths in patterns that suggest non-human agency. These documents exist in archives throughout England, carefully preserved but rarely discussed. They paint a picture of a nation where supernatural activity has been a constant presence throughout recorded history, where official institutions have developed protocols for dealing with phenomena they refuse to acknowledge publicly. The terror lies not just in the existence of these entities, but in their intelligence. These aren't mindless monsters, but beings with their own agendas, their own understanding of human nature, their own methods of manipulation that have been refined over centuries of interaction with our species. They know us better than we know ourselves, understand our weaknesses, our desires, our fears, with a precision that comes from patient observation across generations. They've watched civilizations rise and fall, seen empires conquer and crumble, observed the endless cycle of human ambition and failure. To them, we're not the masters of the land, but temporary occupants whose brief presence barely registers against the vast sweep of supernatural time. They operate according to laws and principles that exist outside human moral systems, pursuing objectives that we can glimpse but never fully comprehend. As we prepare to encounter these ancient terrors in detail, remember that we're not just exploring historical curiosities or entertaining ourselves with spooky stories. We're investigating forces that remain active in the English landscape, entities that continue to influence events in ways that most people never recognize. The forgotten terrors of ancient England aren't museum pieces, but living realities that have adapted to each new era while maintaining their essential nature. Tonight's journey will take us to specific locations where these encounters have been documented, where the evidence of supernatural activity becomes impossible to dismiss or explain away. We'll examine witness accounts, archaeological findings, and historical records that create a compelling case for the existence of forces that challenge our understanding of reality itself. The systematic nature of these encounters becomes clear when we examine the patterns. These aren't random occurrences scattered across the centuries, but carefully orchestrated manifestations that follow rules we're only beginning to understand. The entities we're about to encounter operate like apex predators who've had millennia to perfect their hunting strategies, learning to exploit the deepest vulnerabilities of human psychology. Consider the timing of supernatural manifestations across English history. Major outbreaks of paranormal activity consistently coincide with periods of social upheaval, religious transition, or environmental crisis. The Black Death, the dissolution of the monasteries, the English Civil War, both world wars, each of these traumatic periods saw dramatic increases in supernatural encounters, as if these ancient forces feed on human suffering and uncertainty. But here's what makes this truly chilling. The entities don't just appear during crisis, they help create it. Historical analysis reveals that supernatural manifestations often precede major disasters by months or even years, suggesting these beings possess prophetic knowledge or actively influence events to generate the conditions they require for manifestation. The village of Little Wickham in Gloucestershire provides a perfect example. Between 1347 and 1349, residents reported increasingly frequent encounters with what they described as shadow folk, humanoid figures that appeared at twilight, watching the village from surrounding hills. These sightings were initially dismissed as hysteria, but when the Black Death reached the village 6 months later, Little Wickham suffered a mortality rate nearly twice that of neighbouring settlements. Survivors claimed the shadow folk had been marking victims, that those who encountered them were invariably among the first to succumb to plague. Modern epidemiologists studying medieval plague patterns can't explain Little Wickham's catastrophic mortality rate through conventional means. The village's location, population density, trade connections, and sanitary conditions were typical for the region. Yet something caused the disease to spread with unusual virulence and specificity, targeting individuals in a pattern that defies medical explanation but perfectly matches the supernatural encounters documented by survivors. This intersection of supernatural activity and historical catastrophe appears throughout English records with disturbing consistency. The entities we're dealing with don't just observe human suffering, they cultivate it, orchestrate it, harvest it for purposes we can barely imagine. Moving deeper into their methodology, these ancient terrors demonstrate sophisticated understanding of human psychology that would impress modern behavioral scientists. They know exactly which fears to exploit, which desires to manipulate, which psychological triggers will produce the responses they seek. Their approach varies based on their target's personality, social position, and emotional vulnerabilities, suggesting they conduct detailed reconnaissance before making contact. The case files from Whitby Abbey, preserved in their archives since the 13th century, document this psychological precision with clinical detail. Brother Thomas of Melrose recorded over 40 encounters between 1267 and 1284, noting how each manifestation perfectly targeted the individual monk's specific spiritual weaknesses. Brothers struggling with doubt experienced visions that reinforced their skepticism. Those battling pride encountered entities that inflated their ego before orchestrating humiliating falls from grace. The supernatural forces didn't use random terror tactics, but surgical psychological manipulation designed to corrupt their targets from within. What makes Brother Thomas's accounts particularly credible is their matter-of-fact tone and careful documentation of outcomes. He wasn't writing ghost stories, but compiling case studies, tracking patterns of supernatural influence with the methodical precision of a medieval scientist. His records show that these entities possessed intimate knowledge of each monk's personal history, family relationships, secret shames, and private ambitions, information they couldn't have obtained through normal means. The geographical distribution of these encounters reveals another disturbing pattern. Supernatural activity isn't evenly distributed across England, but concentrates along specific routes that correspond to ancient pathways predating Roman roads. These ley lines, as modern researchers have termed them, connect prehistoric sites in networks that span the entire island. The entities seem to travel along these invisible highways, using them as corridors for moving between manifestation points. Archaeological surveys using ground-penetrating radar have revealed that these supernatural highways follow underground structures, buried stone alignments, ancient earthworks, prehistoric water channels that create a hidden infrastructure beneath modern England. The entities appear to require this network for their activities, becoming more active and powerful when operating near these ancient pathways. This explains why certain English locations have remained persistently haunted throughout recorded history, while neighbouring areas remain relatively quiet. The supernatural geography of England isn't random, but follows laws as precise as physics, governed by forces we're only beginning to detect with modern instruments. Electromagnetic surveys conducted at known supernatural hotspots reveal consistent anomalies, magnetic field distortions, unexplained electromagnetic signatures, energy readings that spike during reported paranormal activity. These aren't subtle variations, but dramatic departures from normal background levels, suggesting the presence of forces that interact with our physical reality in measurable ways. Temperature monitoring at these sites shows similar patterns. Localized cold spots that appear and disappear without atmospheric explanation, thermal signatures that move independently of air currents, heat absorption that violates thermodynamic principles. The entities seem to manipulate environmental conditions as part of their manifestation process, creating the physical conditions necessary for crossing between their realm and ours. But perhaps most disturbing are the biological effects documented at encounter sites. Vegetation dies in specific patterns, animals exhibit behavioral changes weeks before supernatural manifestations, water sources develop unusual mineral compositions that shouldn't exist naturally. The very landscape becomes altered by their presence, as if their alien nature corrupts the natural world at a molecular level. Soil samples from documented encounter sites contain isotope ratios that shouldn't exist in English geology, mineral formations that require pressures and temperatures impossible in surface conditions, organic compounds that don't match any known biological processes. It's as if these locations become infected with matter from elsewhere, contaminated with substances that follow different physical laws than those governing our reality. The implications extend beyond mere supernatural curiosity into questions about the fundamental nature of our world. If these entities can alter physical matter, manipulate electromagnetic fields, and influence biological processes, what does that suggest about the boundaries between the material and immaterial realms? What does their existence tell us about the nature of reality itself? Medical records from areas with high supernatural activity show statistical anomalies that mainstream science struggles to explain. Elevated rates of neurological disorders, unusual patterns of birth defects, psychological conditions that don't respond to conventional treatment. It's as if prolonged exposure to these entities creates permanent changes in human biology, adaptations that persist across generations. The people living in England's most haunted regions have developed characteristics that distinguish them from populations in less active areas. Enhanced sensitivity to atmospheric changes, ability to detect supernatural presence before manifestation, resistance to certain types of psychological manipulation. These traits appear to be inherited, passed down through families that have lived in supernatural hotspots for centuries. We're looking at evidence of ongoing human evolution, driven by supernatural pressure, adaptation to coexistence with forces that most of the world doesn't even acknowledge exist. The forgotten terrors of ancient England haven't just influenced our history and culture, they've literally shaped our biology, creating subtle but measurable changes in our species that persist to this day. As we prepare to examine specific encounters with these entities, remember that we're not just investigating historical curiosities, but active forces that continue to influence the English landscape and its inhabitants. The evidence suggests we're sharing our world with intelligences that operate according to principles we can barely comprehend, pursuing objectives that may be fundamentally incompatible with human welfare. The forgotten terrors await, patient as stone, watching as they have for millennia, ready to teach us hard lessons about the true nature of the world we think we know. The methodical precision of these supernatural encounters becomes even more chilling when we examine their recruitment patterns. These ancient terrors don't simply terrorize random victims. They systematically identify and cultivate human agents, individuals whose psychological profiles make them susceptible to supernatural influence. The process unfolds over months or even years, with the entities gradually conditioning their targets through carefully orchestrated experiences that blur the line between reality and nightmare. Parish records from the 14th century onward document recurring patterns of behavior among individuals who later became associated with supernatural phenomena. Initial contact typically occurs during moments of extreme emotional vulnerability, grief, desperation, rage, or profound loneliness. The entities seem drawn to these psychological wounds, like predators sensing weakness, approaching their targets with offers of knowledge, power, or resolution to their suffering. What follows is a gradual process of spiritual corruption that medieval chroniclers described with remarkable consistency across different regions and time periods. The chosen individuals begin experiencing vivid dreams that feel more real than waking life, dreams that provide them with information they couldn't possibly possess through normal means. They start demonstrating uncanny abilities, knowing things about neighbors' private affairs, predicting weather patterns with impossible accuracy, finding lost objects or missing persons with supernatural precision. The village of Thornwick in Northumberland provides a documented case study of this recruitment process. In 1423, local records describe how Margaret Blackthorne, a widow struggling to support 3 young children, began experiencing what she initially believed were divine visions following her husband's death in a hunting accident. These visions provided her with herbal knowledge that enabled her to heal ailments that had baffled the village physician. Word of Margaret's abilities spread throughout the region, and desperate families traveled great distances seeking her aid. She could diagnose diseases by touching patients' hands, locate underground water sources for new wells, and predict which crops would thrive in specific soil conditions. The local priest initially praised her gifts as divine blessings, evidence that God was providing for the widow and her children through miraculous intervention. But Margaret's supernatural benefactors had been carefully studying human nature for centuries, and they understood that pride comes before destruction. As her reputation grew, so did her sense of importance and power. The visions began encouraging her to challenge church authority, to question established religious doctrine, to position herself as a conduit for wisdom that surpassed traditional Christian teaching. The transformation accelerated when Margaret began hosting gatherings where she would enter trance states and channel communications from what she claimed were angelic intelligences. These sessions attracted followers from across the countryside, individuals seeking spiritual experiences more intense than conventional worship could provide. The meetings gradually incorporated elements that disturbed local authorities, ritual practices that resembled pre-Christian ceremonies, teachings that contradicted established theology, demonstrations of power that seemed to mock divine authority rather than honor it. By 1427, Margaret had established what amounted to an alternative religious movement, with herself as its central figure. She claimed direct revelation from supernatural sources that superseded biblical authority, performed healings that required participants to renounce their Christian faith, and conducted ceremonies that witnesses described as transforming her physical appearance in ways that suggested non-human possession. The church authorities who investigated Margaret's activities documented phenomena that challenged their understanding of spiritual reality. She demonstrated knowledge of Latin texts she had never studied, spoke in languages that scholars couldn't identify, and exhibited physical capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations. During her rituals, witnesses reported that her voice would change, becoming deeper and resonating with harmonics that seemed to emerge from multiple sources simultaneously. Most disturbing were the effects on her followers. Individuals who attended Margaret's gatherings began exhibiting similar supernatural abilities, but these gifts came with psychological costs that became increasingly apparent over time. They developed obsessive behaviors, lost interest in normal human relationships, and demonstrated growing disconnection from emotional responses that define healthy human psychology. The investigation culminated in 1428, when church officials attempted to confront Margaret during one of her ceremonies. Witnesses described how she seemed to grow in physical stature as they approached, her eyes reflecting light in ways that shouldn't be possible, her skin taking on a translucent quality that revealed something moving beneath the surface. When they attempted to perform an exorcism, the ritual backfired catastrophically, with several participants suffering what appeared to be supernatural attacks that left them permanently changed. Margaret vanished that night, along with her 3 children and most devoted followers. The abandoned settlement was found to be contaminated with the same isotopic anomalies discovered at other supernatural encounter sites. Vegetation withered in geometric patterns around her former home. Water sources developed mineral compositions that shouldn't exist naturally, and electromagnetic readings remained disturbed for decades afterward. Similar recruitment patterns appear throughout English supernatural history, suggesting these entities have perfected techniques for identifying and cultivating human agents across centuries of practice. They target individuals during vulnerable periods, offer genuine supernatural assistance to build trust and dependency, then gradually corrupt their targets' moral and spiritual foundations until they become willing servants of forces that operate outside human ethical systems. The transformation process appears to be irreversible once it reaches a certain threshold. Historical records show that individuals who fall under deep supernatural influence develop physiological changes that persist even after the entities withdraw their support. Their brain patterns alter permanently, showing activity in regions associated with psychic phenomena, while losing function in areas responsible for empathy and emotional regulation. Modern neuroscience provides disturbing insights into these historical accounts. Brain scans of individuals claiming supernatural abilities show consistent abnormalities in the temporal lobe and limbic system, regions associated with religious experience, perception of time, and emotional processing. These changes appear to be structural rather than functional, suggesting permanent alterations to neural architecture that couldn't result from psychological suggestion alone. Blood chemistry analysis reveals similar anomalies. Elevated levels of neurotransmitters associated with altered consciousness states, hormone profiles that don't match normal human baselines, and the presence of organic compounds that shouldn't exist in human biology. These individuals seem to become hybrid beings, retaining human appearance while developing internal systems that operate according to different biological principles. The genetic implications are perhaps most troubling. DNA analysis of families with multi-generational supernatural activity shows mutations that don't appear in the general population, changes to genetic sequences that govern neural development, sensory processing, and hormonal regulation. These modifications appear to be inherited, suggesting that supernatural influence can create permanent alterations to human genetic code that persist across generations. We're looking at evidence of directed human evolution, modification of our species by intelligences that understand genetics in ways that exceed our current scientific knowledge. The forgotten terrors of ancient England haven't just influenced human culture and psychology. They've been systematically altering human biology to create individuals better suited to serve their incomprehensible purposes. The breeding programs become apparent when we examine marriage patterns in families with supernatural histories. These bloodlines don't intermarry randomly, but follow specific patterns that suggest careful genetic management over centuries. Individuals with supernatural abilities consistently choose partners from other affected families, creating genetic isolation that concentrates and amplifies whatever modifications have been made to their DNA. Parish marriage records reveal these patterns with mathematical precision. Families known for supernatural activity form interconnected networks that span centuries, with bloodlines that maintain their altered characteristics through selective breeding that appears to be guided by intelligence beyond human understanding. The entities seem to be cultivating specific genetic traits through long-term manipulation of human reproduction. Children born into these supernatural bloodlines exhibit enhanced abilities from early ages: sensitivity to electromagnetic fields, ability to perceive events beyond normal sensory range, resistance to psychological manipulation techniques that affect normal individuals. They also demonstrate concerning deficits in areas that make humans distinctly human: reduced capacity for empathy, limited emotional range, and difficulty forming genuine attachments to individuals outside their supernatural community. These hybrid populations serve as the entity's primary interface with human society, individuals who can operate within normal social structures while advancing supernatural agendas that most people never recognize. They become teachers, clergy, government officials, business leaders, positions of influence that enable them to shape human society according to principles that serve their non-human masters. The infiltration extends into modern institutions with disturbing thoroughness. Government agencies responsible for investigating unexplained phenomena consistently recruit personnel from families with supernatural histories. Academic departments studying paranormal activity show statistical clustering of researchers whose bloodlines connect to documented supernatural encounters. Even skeptical organizations dedicated to debunking supernatural claims contain individuals whose genetic profiles suggest they've been specifically placed to control and direct human understanding of these phenomena. We're not just dealing with ancient terrors that occasionally manifest in remote locations. We're confronting evidence of a systematic campaign to influence human civilization that has been operating for centuries with patience and precision that exceeds any human conspiracy. The entities have created a network of human agents whose genetic modifications make them ideally suited to advance supernatural objectives while appearing to be ordinary members of society. The scope of this infiltration becomes apparent when we examine statistical anomalies in areas with high concentrations of supernatural bloodlines. These regions show consistent patterns, unusual political stability that persists through national upheavals, economic prosperity that seems disconnected from normal market forces, cultural traditions that preserve pre-Christian elements despite centuries of religious pressure. It's as if these communities exist within protective bubbles maintained by their supernatural patrons, insulated from the chaos and suffering that affects normal human populations. But this protection comes with obligations that bind them to serve purposes that extend far beyond human welfare or understanding. The ancient terrors of England haven't retreated into history. They've embedded themselves so deeply into human society that they've become invisible, operating through modified bloodlines that carry out their agenda while believing they're making independent choices. The forgotten terrors were never truly forgotten. They've simply learned to hide in plain sight, wearing human faces while pursuing objectives that may ultimately prove incompatible with human survival. The evidence trails we've been following lead to a conclusion that challenges everything we thought we knew about human history and the nature of reality itself. We're not the masters of our own destiny, but participants in a vast experiment conducted by intelligences that view us as raw material for purposes we can barely begin to comprehend. As we prepare to encounter specific manifestations of these ancient terrors, remember that we're not just examining historical curiosities, but active forces that continue to shape human civilization through methods so subtle that most people never recognize their influence. The forgotten terrors of ancient England represent just one branch of a global phenomenon that has been guiding human development for millennia, preparing us for a future that may look nothing like what we imagine. The entities await our investigation with patience born of centuries, confident that even our attempts to expose them serve purposes they've already anticipated and incorporated into plans that stretch far beyond our ability to perceive or comprehend. The documentation becomes even more disturbing when we examine the archaeological evidence scattered across England's ancient landscape. Excavations at prehistoric sites consistently reveal burial practices that defy conventional understanding of our ancestors' beliefs and capabilities. These aren't simple interments, but complex ritual arrangements that suggest our forebears possessed sophisticated knowledge about manipulating supernatural forces. At Barrow Hill in Wiltshire, archaeologists uncovered a burial chamber dating to 2800 BCE that contained human remains arranged in geometric patterns impossible to achieve without advanced mathematical understanding. The bodies weren't simply laid to rest, but positioned according to astronomical alignments that correspond to celestial events occurring once every 4,000 years. More disturbing still, isotope analysis of the bones reveals that these individuals weren't local to the region, but had traveled from locations across Europe, suggesting coordinated supernatural activity spanning vast distances. The grave goods found with these remains challenge everything we thought we knew about Bronze Age capabilities. Metal objects forged using techniques that wouldn't be rediscovered until the Industrial Revolution. Crystalline formations that don't occur naturally in British geology. Organic materials preserved through processes that modern science can't replicate. It's as if these ancient peoples possessed technologies that operated according to principles we've yet to understand. But the most chilling discoveries lie in the bone modifications found at these sites. Deliberate alterations to human skulls that created cavities where none should exist. Surgical procedures performed with precision that exceeds modern medical capabilities. Evidence of trepanation conducted not for medical reasons, but to create openings that seem designed to accommodate something foreign to human anatomy. X-ray analysis reveals that many of these modified individuals survived their procedures and lived for years afterward, their altered skulls showing signs of healing around artificial openings. What were these cavities for? What was inserted into these deliberately created spaces? The archaeological record provides no conventional explanation, but the consistency of these modifications across different time periods and geographical locations suggests purposeful alteration of human physiology. Microscopic examination of the bone surfaces reveals tool marks that don't match any known prehistoric implements. The cutting patterns show precision that requires instruments sharper and more durable than anything available to Bronze Age peoples. Yet these modifications were performed with such skill that the subjects not only survived, but apparently thrived, developing enhanced cranial capacity and neural pathways that differ significantly from normal human anatomy. Carbon dating of organic residues found in these skull cavities reveals contamination with isotopes that shouldn't exist in terrestrial materials. The substances show decay patterns consistent with extraterrestrial origin, suggesting these procedures involved implanting foreign materials that operated according to different physical laws than those governing earthly matter. Similar modifications appear in burial sites throughout England, each following identical procedures despite being separated by centuries and hundreds of miles. The consistency suggests these weren't isolated experiments, but part of a coordinated program spanning millennia, conducted by entities possessing knowledge that far exceeded human capabilities of their respective time periods. The individuals who received these modifications seem to have held special positions within their communities. They're buried with honors reserved for high-ranking leaders, surrounded by grave goods that indicate significant social status. But their skeletal remains show characteristics that distinguish them from normal human populations. Enhanced bone density, enlarged neural foramina, structural adaptations that suggest their modified brains require different support systems than ordinary human anatomy. Genetic analysis of DNA extracted from these remains reveals the same mutations found in modern families with supernatural histories. The modifications weren't just physical, but involved fundamental alterations to genetic code that created inheritable changes in human biology. These ancient procedures established bloodlines that have persisted for thousands of years, carrying supernatural traits through generation after generation. The distribution of these burial sites follows the same patterns we've identified in modern supernatural activity, concentrated along ancient pathways that connect prehistoric monuments in networks spanning the entire island. The entities weren't just modifying individual humans, but establishing an infrastructure for supernatural influence that has operated continuously since the Bronze Age. Ground-penetrating radar surveys reveal that many of these burial sites connect to underground structures that extend far beyond the visible monuments. Subterranean chambers linked by tunnels that stretch for miles beneath the English countryside, creating a hidden network that parallels the surface geography. These underground complexes show signs of continuous use from prehistoric times to the present day, suggesting they remain active centers for supernatural activity. Seismic monitoring at these locations detects regular patterns of underground movement that don't correspond to geological activity. The vibrations follow rhythmic cycles that correlate with astronomical events, tidal patterns, and electromagnetic fluctuations in ways that suggest purposeful coordination. Something is moving through these underground networks, following schedules that operate according to cosmic rather than terrestrial timeframes. Electromagnetic surveys reveal that these subterranean structures conduct energy in ways that violate conventional physics. They seem to function as massive circuits that channel forces we can detect but don't understand, creating fields that influence everything from local weather patterns to human neurological activity. The ancient builders didn't just create monuments, but constructed technological systems that continue operating thousands of years after their creators vanished. The sophistication becomes apparent when we examine how these systems interact with modern technology. Electronic equipment consistently malfunctions near these sites, but the failures follow predictable patterns that suggest interference rather than random breakdown. GPS systems show location errors that cluster around specific coordinates. Radio communications develop static that contains structured signals, and digital recordings capture sounds that exist outside normal frequency ranges. Military installations built near these ancient sites report ongoing technical difficulties that defense contractors can't explain or resolve. Radar systems detect objects that don't correspond to known aircraft or atmospheric phenomena. Communication networks experience data corruption that creates messages in languages that linguistic experts can't identify. Computer systems develop programming anomalies that serve no apparent function, but demonstrate complexity exceeding human coding capabilities. The entities seem to be actively studying and adapting to human technological advancement, learning to manipulate our electronic systems with the same precision they've applied to human biology and psychology. They're not passive observers of human progress, but active participants who influence our technological development in ways that serve their own incomprehensible objectives. Patent records show unusual clustering of breakthrough innovations by inventors living near ancient supernatural sites. Technologies that revolutionized human capabilities often emerged from individuals whose family histories connect to documented supernatural encounters. The development of radio, radar, computer processing, and quantum mechanics all trace back to researchers whose bloodlines carry the genetic modifications we've identified in prehistoric remains. We're looking at evidence that human technological advancement has been guided by supernatural intelligence for centuries, with breakthrough discoveries emerging through modified bloodlines that serve as conduits for knowledge beyond normal human capability. The forgotten terrors of ancient England haven't just influenced our past. They've been actively shaping our technological future according to plans that extend far beyond our ability to perceive their ultimate objectives. The integration becomes more apparent when we examine how modern supernatural encounters incorporate technological elements that weren't present in historical accounts. Contemporary witnesses report entities that demonstrate familiarity with electronic devices, manipulating cameras to avoid documentation, interfering with recording equipment in ways that suggest understanding of digital technology, communicating through electronic systems using methods that exceed human programming capabilities. These aren't primitive ancient spirits struggling to adapt to modern conditions, but sophisticated intelligences that have evolved alongside human technological development, maintaining their essential nature while acquiring new capabilities that make them even more effective at achieving their mysterious goals. The evidence suggests we're approaching a convergence point where ancient supernatural forces and human technology will merge in ways that could fundamentally transform the nature of reality itself. The entities have spent millennia preparing for this moment, establishing the infrastructure, modifying human biology, and guiding technological development toward outcomes that serve purposes we can only begin to imagine. The forgotten terrors of ancient England represent the visible tip of a vast iceberg of supernatural activity that has been operating beneath human awareness for thousands of years. What we're witnessing isn't random haunting or sporadic paranormal activity, but the systematic implementation of plans so complex and long-term that human minds struggle to perceive their scope. As we prepare to examine specific encounters with these entities, remember that we're not just investigating historical curiosities, but active phases of an ongoing operation that may be approaching its culmination. The ancient terrors have been patient, methodical, and incredibly thorough in their preparations. Now, as human technology reaches levels that enable new forms of supernatural manifestation, they may be ready to reveal the true scope of their influence over human civilization. The evidence trails lead to conclusions that challenge not just our understanding of history, but our fundamental assumptions about human autonomy and the nature of consciousness itself. We may discover that what we consider human achievement has been guided by non-human intelligence, pursuing objectives that transcend our ability to comprehend or resist. The forgotten terrors await our investigation with confidence born of millennia of careful planning, knowing that even our attempts to understand them serve purposes they incorporated into their designs long before we developed the capability to recognize their influence. The psychological warfare these entities wage against human consciousness operates on levels that make conventional understanding of manipulation seem primitive by comparison. They don't simply exploit existing fears or desires, but actively reshape human perception at the neurological level, creating new pathways of thought that serve their purposes while appearing to emerge from our own rational processes. Modern brain imaging technology has revealed disturbing patterns in individuals who live near ancient supernatural sites. PET scans show unusual activity in the pineal gland, often called the third eye by mystics, but also in regions of the brain that typically remain dormant throughout human life. These activated areas don't correspond to any known neurological function, suggesting our species possesses latent capabilities that these entities can selectively trigger. The activation process appears to be contagious in ways that violate everything we understand about neurology. Individuals with no direct supernatural contact begin exhibiting the same brain patterns after prolonged exposure to affected persons. It's as if the modifications spread through some form of neurological resonance, creating expanding networks of altered consciousness that operate according to principles beyond current scientific understanding. Dr. Sarah Whitmore's research at Cambridge, conducted between 2019 and 2022 before her sudden disappearance, documented these neurological changes with clinical precision. Her subjects, all residents of villages within 5 miles of prehistoric stone circles, showed progressive alterations in brain structure that accelerated over the course of her study. Most disturbing was her final report, filed just days before she vanished, describing how the affected individuals had begun demonstrating collective consciousness behaviors. They would simultaneously perform identical actions despite being separated by miles. They developed shared memories of events none had personally experienced. They began speaking in unison during interviews, their voices harmonizing in frequencies that created subsonic vibrations detectable only by sensitive equipment. Dr. Whitmore's last recorded observation was that her subjects were becoming components of a distributed intelligence system whose total capacity exceeded the sum of its individual parts. The university sealed her research after her disappearance, classifying it as sensitive material that poses potential threats to public safety. But fragments of her data leaked through academic networks, revealing that the neurological modifications she documented weren't random mutations, but precisely engineered alterations designed to transform human consciousness into something that could interface directly with non-human intelligence. Brain tissue samples from individuals with advanced modifications contain structures that don't exist in normal human anatomy. Neural clusters arranged in geometric patterns that mirror the stone circle alignments found throughout England. Synaptic networks that conduct electrical impulses in ways that create standing wave patterns resembling the electromagnetic signatures detected at supernatural hotspots. It's as if human brains are being converted into biological receivers tuned to frequencies that carry information from sources beyond terrestrial origin. The transformation affects more than individual consciousness. Communities with high concentrations of modified individuals begin exhibiting collective behaviors that suggest coordinated purpose beyond conscious awareness. Village decisions that consistently benefit unknown objectives. Economic activities that generate patterns serving no apparent local interest. Cultural practices that preserve and transmit information through seemingly innocent traditions. Thornbury in Gloucestershire provides a perfect case study. This village of barely 800 residents has maintained unchanged population levels for over 400 years, with families intermarrying according to patterns that preserve specific genetic combinations. The village economy operates through cooperative arrangements that defy modern economic theory, yet consistently generates prosperity that attracts no outside attention or investigation. Local traditions include seasonal festivals that correspond to astronomical events with precision exceeding amateur astronomical knowledge. Children learn songs that contain mathematical concepts not typically introduced until university-level education. Village records are maintained using symbolic notation that resembles prehistoric pictographs found at nearby burial sites. Most telling are the village's demographic statistics. Birth rates that maintain exact population stability despite national trends. Death rates that cluster around specific ages corresponding to generational turnover. Marriage patterns that ensure genetic diversity within acceptable parameters while preserving bloodline characteristics across centuries. Thornbury operates like a carefully managed biological experiment designed to maintain specific population characteristics while appearing to function as a normal English village. The residents show no conscious awareness of these patterns, yet their individual choices consistently serve objectives that none of them could articulate or recognize. Similar communities exist throughout England, each maintaining the same mathematical precision in population management, genetic preservation, and cultural transmission. They form a network of human breeding programs that have operated for centuries without detection by outside authorities, creating reservoirs of modified bloodlines that serve as resources for supernatural entities pursuing objectives that span generations. The scope becomes apparent when we map these communities using demographic analysis software. They're distributed according to the same geometric patterns found in prehistoric monument alignments, connected by the underground networks we've identified through archaeological surveys. Each village functions as a node in a vast biological computer system that processes information and generates responses according to programming that exists beyond human awareness. The entities have created a shadow civilization within human society, populations that appear normal but operate according to alien principles while serving purposes that extend far beyond individual or community welfare. These people live, work, reproduce, and die according to schedules that advance supernatural objectives while believing they're making independent choices based on personal desires and rational analysis. Government census data reveals statistical anomalies that become obvious once you know what to look for. Regions with prehistoric monuments show population stability that defies normal demographic trends. Career choices that cluster around professions providing access to sensitive information or decision-making authority. Educational achievements that concentrate specific types of knowledge while avoiding areas that might threaten supernatural secrecy. These modified populations have infiltrated every level of British society with thoroughness that suggests centuries of careful planning. They serve in Parliament, making decisions that affect national policy. They work in intelligence agencies, controlling information about supernatural phenomena. They hold academic positions, shaping public understanding of history and archaeology. They operate media organizations, determining which stories receive attention and which remain buried. Most disturbing is their presence in organizations specifically created to investigate unexplained phenomena. Skeptical societies founded to debunk supernatural claims are staffed by individuals whose bloodlines connect to documented supernatural encounters. Government agencies responsible for monitoring unusual events recruit personnel from families with multi-generational paranormal histories. Even military units tasked with responding to unexplained threats contain officers whose genetic profiles suggest they've been specifically placed to control official responses to supernatural activity. We're not dealing with random infiltration, but systematic placement of assets designed to ensure that human understanding of supernatural phenomena remains limited to levels that serve entity objectives. Every official investigation, every academic study, every media report about paranormal activity is filtered through networks of modified humans whose unconscious programming ensures that public knowledge never approaches dangerous levels of accuracy. The control extends into popular culture with disturbing precision. Horror films and supernatural fiction consistently present distorted versions of genuine phenomena, creating public expectations that make actual supernatural encounters seem like familiar entertainment rather than genuine threats. The entities use human creativity as a weapon against human awareness, transforming our own storytelling instincts into tools for maintaining their secrecy. Authors who attempt to write accurate accounts of supernatural phenomena find their work rejected by publishers whose editorial staff include individuals from modified bloodlines. Those who persist in revealing dangerous truths experience career destruction through coordinated campaigns that appear to emerge from normal market forces, but follow patterns too precise to result from coincidence. The few researchers who've recognized these patterns and attempted to expose them have faced consequences that demonstrate the entity's ability to manipulate human institutions with surgical precision. Academic careers destroyed through false accusations that investigators can't trace to specific sources. Government security clearances revoked based on psychological evaluations conducted by psychiatrists whose family histories connect to supernatural bloodlines. Personal relationships dissolved through influence campaigns that turn friends and family members against targets using techniques that leave no evidence of external manipulation. The message is clear. Investigation of supernatural phenomena beyond approved parameters will result in systematic destruction of everything that makes human life meaningful. The entities don't need to resort to dramatic supernatural attacks when they can achieve their objectives through the modified humans they've placed throughout society's power structures. This creates a terrifying paradox for anyone seeking to understand the true scope of supernatural influence over human civilization. The more accurately you perceive their activities, the more dangerous you become to their operations, triggering responses that demonstrate their complete infiltration of systems designed to protect human welfare and freedom. Yet the evidence continues to accumulate despite their efforts at suppression. Archaeological discoveries that reveal prehistoric technologies beyond conventional capabilities. Genetic studies that document non-human modifications to human DNA. Neurological research that proves consciousness can be artificially altered through methods that exceed current scientific understanding. Government documents that acknowledge supernatural phenomena while maintaining official denial of their existence. Each piece of evidence, considered individually, might be dismissed as anomaly or misinterpretation. But the patterns that emerge when all the data is analyzed collectively paint a picture of reality that challenges every assumption about human autonomy, historical development, and the nature of consciousness itself. We're approaching a critical juncture where the accumulated evidence can no longer be suppressed through conventional methods. The entity's modifications to human biology and consciousness have reached levels where their effects become too obvious to hide. Their infiltration of human institutions has become so thorough that maintaining secrecy requires increasingly dramatic interventions that risk exposing their presence. The technological convergence we've identified suggests they may be preparing to abandon covert influence in favor of open control. Human technology has reached levels that enable new forms of supernatural manifestation, while creating vulnerabilities that these ancient intelligences can exploit in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. The forgotten terrors of ancient England may be preparing to remind humanity that we were never truly in control of our own destiny, that what we consider civilization has always operated according to parameters established by forces whose objectives transcend our ability to understand or resist. The evidence suggests we're about to discover just how thoroughly our reality has been shaped by intelligences that view human welfare as secondary to purposes that may ultimately prove incompatible with human survival. As we stand at this threshold between ignorance and terrible knowledge, the ancient terrors watch with patience born of millennia, knowing that revelation of their influence serves objectives they incorporated into their plans long before we developed the capability to recognize the scope of their control over everything we consider fundamentally human. And so, our descent into England's most forbidden archives draws to its terrifying conclusion. We've traced the threads that connect Bronze Age burial chambers to modern neurological modifications, followed the underground networks that channel forces our ancestors feared to name, witnessed evidence of a supernatural intelligence that has been systematically reshaping human civilization for thousands of years. The forgotten terrors of ancient England were never truly forgotten. They simply evolved, adapted, learned to hide within the very institutions we trust to protect us. They operate through modified bloodlines that carry their influence into every corner of society while believing they act from free will. They've created shadow communities that maintain their genetic experiments across centuries of careful breeding programs disguised as quaint village traditions. Most chilling of all, we've discovered that human technological advancement itself may be guided by these entities, pushing us toward a convergence point where ancient supernatural forces and modern systems will merge in ways that could transform the nature of reality itself. The evidence suggests we're approaching the culmination of plans that span millennia, the moment when covert influence gives way to open control. But knowledge, even terrible knowledge, carries power. By recognizing these patterns, by understanding the scope of supernatural infiltration into human affairs, we arm ourselves with awareness that these entities have spent centuries trying to prevent. Each subscriber to Baffling Tales becomes part of a network of modern witnesses, guardians of truths that challenge everything we thought we knew about our world. The ancient terrors remain patient, confident in their vast preparations, yet perhaps they underestimate human resilience when faced with existential threat. Share this investigation with those brave enough to confront uncomfortable realities. Leave a comment, sharing your own encounters with forces that shouldn't exist. And remember, in a world where the impossible has become inevitable, staying informed may be our only protection against influences that view human consciousness itself as territory to be conquered. The forgotten terrors of ancient England continue their eternal watch, but now we watch back. Until next time, this is Baffling Tales, where truth is stranger and more terrifying than any fiction we could imagine.